This is ACOFAE. Laura Marie and Jessica Marie proudly present A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, a podcast. Fair warning, everything the hosts say is explicit, full of spoilers and adult content and shall not be used against them. They have opinions. Let's try not to drag anyone for expressing themselves and just have fun for an hour. We all deserve it.
This episode contains no spoilers, but does mention the Half King and Overboard.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, your weekly deep dive into the fantasy, literature, and fandoms that we love. I'm Laura Marie.
And I'm Jessica Marie.
And today we are welcoming a very special guest and our new friend, Melissa Landers,
who is the author of romantasy novel The Half King. Welcome, Melissa.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We are here with Melissa Landers, and we are talking about her new release, The Half King. Now, this is a different genre for you. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. The Half King is a new adult romantasy, as they say. Most of my previous releases have been for young adults. This is for a slightly older audience. I honestly think it could go both ways if you have older teens that are a little more mature or used to mature content, or adults. But The Half King follows the journey of a young woman named Cerise, who has been raised since birth in the temple of her goddess, and she's supposed to be training to be an oracle, but she is a spectacular failure. And so she's dispatched to serve the Half King, who is a young man who rules by day and turns to shadow at sunset, hence the name, the Half King. And in doing so, she basically unravels 1,000 years of secrets and lies and curses.
It's incredible. It's amazing. And before we really kind of get into this, Jessica Marie and I both have not hard copies, but we have our ARCs
physical
here.
Copies,
our physical copies. And included with our physical copy is a wonderful card that kind of explains broad themes that are happening in our book. And you are sharing something personal with our special readers. And I think that is absolutely lovely. So, The Half King, where did this come from?
Oh gosh, that's a long answer.
And we want to hear it.
So inspiration is a funny thing. Sometimes I know exactly where inspiration comes from. My book Starflight, for example, was a deliberate outer space reimagining of the old 80s romantic comedy Overboard. But with The Half King, it was more organic, and those are the hardest ones to pin down in terms of inspiration. I just came up with, all right, a king who turns to shadow at sunset, a girl who's been raised in a temple since birth. And I didn't know it at the time, but in setting that book anywhere in a temple, anywhere with the expectation of serving a goddess, that it was going to unlock a little closed door in the back of my brain and unleash decades of, I don't want to say religious trauma, let's say religious resentment. I was raised in an extremely high control, high demand, cult-like religion. I'm not going to name it, but anyone listening, if you know, you know. I was taught that having sex before marriage was a sin so heinous that it was only second to murder. And you can't teach that to a young, impressionable child and expect them to have a healthy sense of their own sexuality. I was taught that anything I did solo activity-wise or with a consenting partner was just the most egregious, heinous sin. And you can't tell a child, hey, this thing is horrible under these circumstances, but wonderful under these circumstances. A child's mind doesn't process like that. The child believes, well, God, if it's this horrible, it just must be all bad. Anyway, if you've read The Half King, you've no doubt picked up on those hints of my religious resentment. And trust me, I have toned it down 1,000-fold. The early version of this book was so thick with my resentment that it just took over the whole plot. It needed a whole rewrite. But anyway, that's one of the main inspirations for the plot, but I did not intend it to be. At no point when I sat down to write the original synopsis did religious deconstruction have anything to do with the plot. So yeah, fun times. Melissa's subconscious mind just completely hijacked that manuscript.
Did the process feel cathartic when you started exploring these plots and themes, and just like, especially that first draft, you're like, didn't even intend to vomit all of this information, but now it's on paper and we're going to do something with it.
You know, it probably didn't feel cathartic in the first draft because I didn't intend for it to happen. But once I embraced that, you know what? Yeah, this is a story that needs to be told, and there is room in this plot for her specific journey through deprogramming, then it did feel cathartic.
That's incredible. I know that our listeners might be familiar, but I have a background in education with minors in women and gender studies and religious studies. So this book was right up my alley in so many ways. This is absolutely amazing. So when one of our main characters was like, why though? Why though? It was so wonderful to have our main character be like, you know what? Why though? And to have these questions, because I do feel like, because we're not talking religious trauma, we're talking religious resentment. I do feel like the exploration of those themes is something that more people should be kind of listening to, be reading, be aware of, because questioning things is how we grow and learn and expand. And that is what we are all about. So my question for you then is, what was it like sitting down and creating a fantasy world in comparison to when you sit down and you create like a sci-fi kind of situation? Is the writing process different? Are we pantsers? Are we plotters? What are you like as a writer?
Fantasy was 1,000 times harder than science fiction. And it's funny because sci-fi, that's my first love. And unfortunately, it's a hard sell in the market. It always has been. And I thought, it could be fun to write fantasy. No rules. I can do whatever I want. And the same reason I thought fantasy would be so fun is the very reason that makes it so hard. There are no rules. Writing science fiction, I can stretch. And I mean, I did stretch the boundaries of science. I wrote a middle grade called Blastaway where you can lasso stars and tow them. I mean, it's absurd, right? But at least there are boundaries there. In fantasy, the boundaries don't exist. You have to create everything. And that's such a massive job. And the potential for plot holes, infinite. In creating the curse system that I did, in establishing that this horrible thing happened 1,000 years ago, this great betrayal in which the noble dynasties colluded to slay the goddess, and she cursed each of their descendants in this specific way, but only the firstborn descendant and the secondborns go to serve at the temple, and only the secondborns are gifted. In establishing all these rules, I kind of wrote myself into a couple corners and had to untangle a couple of things. And I'm not going to say what. I'll tell you after the call's over, the big one that I luckily caught. But yeah, it's so much harder because you have to create all of the rules, all of them. And that's such a huge task. Now, as for my process, I am somewhere in between a plotter and a pantser. I've learned the hard way that if I completely pants it, I go way off track and I spend so much time in rewrites that it's not worth it. So what I like to do is come up with an extremely skeletal, I don't even want to call it an outline. It's usually a 4-page synopsis, just hitting the major points. And then I like to discover going from point A to point B by myself. There needs to be some element of discovery, A, to keep it fresh, and B, because I don't think I'm capable of sitting down and pre-planning literally every detail of the whole novel in one sitting. I don't understand how anyone does that. I bow down to them, so I call myself a plantser.
Do you feel like because you have those, I don't want to say limitations, but that structure for yourself, have you found that characters that you've created start to write themselves and that's where you're going? You're like, guess we're pantsing today based on the plotting.
I don't know. So much of characters come from my mood. When I wrote Derek, I must have just been in a fun mood that day, and he became our comic relief. Sometimes it does happen that way.
That is so interesting because obviously I am not a writer. I could not do any of this. But when we are talking about fantasy, one of the first things that come to mind is the map. And the map is something that is a fantasy reader's joy, right? We love a good map. I am looking in my copy here, and we have one right here, and it is beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit of how this map came to be? Because fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I cannot take credit for that map. When they asked me to draw a map, I was like, you don't want that. They said, no, it can look like a 5-year-old drew it. We just need something for, the illustrator to work with. And in the Half King, you have this realm, but 99.9999% of the story takes place in Mortara, in this one centralized location. They go on a journey into the mountains, but it's one part of the realm. So I sat down and I drew out the most infantile, like they said a 5-year-old could do it. It was more like a toddler. It looked abysmal, but I did my best. And then they passed it on to the illustrator who really brought it to life.
That's amazing. Of course, I cannot do any sort of art, but the map is something that kind of grounds you in a fantasy world, which can get, bigger and bigger as we get deeper and deeper into this story. And we do kind of start off that way. We start off, we are with our main character. We're in a temple. We're meeting people. And then we go on a journey of miles, quite literally, but also of self-discovery. And it is within the self-discovery journey that the reader is also like, wow, this is really something here. And I have to tell you, the twists are twisting. I was gasping. I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen at this end scene is absolutely amazing. And I just have to know. So in writing fantasy, I would feel that the pace is kind of a little bit slower. We're not in sci-fi. We're not zooming around. We're not in space. We are on horseback. We are walking. We are kind of going on a journey. Is that kind of our journey structure? Is that kind of the same or different with sci-fi? Because I am a deep fan of sci-fi. I absolutely love it. So to hear that and to know that you have this background and then to know that this is your first fantasy book, I am just so interested in the switch. I just love it so much because as you have said, and as is the case, unfortunately, sci-fi is a hard sell. It is a little intimidating. It is kind of, it can come off a little bit cold where fantasy, can come off as warm and cozy. And I don't think that's fair. Obviously, sci-fi is wonderful. But going through this journey here, this quest that we're on, going into these mountains, what was that like? Was that fun or was that, again, a little intimidating?
Oh, no, it was lots of fun. I think my favorite part of the journey to write was their journey through the mountains. It was so easy to picture this desolate, arid, cursed place where this great betrayal had happened, where the goddess had bled, where if for anyone listening, the goddess is a duality. She is all things. She's, like the God and the devil all combined. She's darkness and light. She's mercy and wrath. She's all things. And so during this great betrayal, she bled, and her vengeful half just completely blighted this landscape and twisted the animals that live there. And I had so much fun with that, especially the scene where Cerise and Nero and Derek have to defend themselves from the Titan hyena pack. That scene practically wrote itself. It was just so much fun. And that's not typical for me. The action scenes aren't usually my favorite. I like dialogue, and love scenes. Those are the ones that come to me the easiest. Action scenes are a very tough thing to master because, strangely, if the scene goes on too long, you get the opposite of action. It drags. And so it's a fine balance to show the battle, as it were, without making it boring. Because the last thing you want is an action scene that's boring.
And then you can't have the action scene too short because then everybody's just like, wait, that doesn't seem realistic. And
right.
The way, like, you have people questioning realism in the fantasy world that you're creating the species, you're creating the rules, you're creating the laws. And sometimes you would think, like you were saying, like it's the best part of creating and also the most difficult because it could be easy. I know you said like you can get yourself in a corner, but then you're also like, but could I explain myself out of it because it's my own world that I created?
So the goddess is a huge, huge figure in your story, the Half King. Now, was the goddess always going to be the goddess? Was it going to be some other religious figure? And kind of adding to that, you said like setting this in the temple was part of it. Was it always going to be some sort of religious aspect to this? Was that always a key plot point? I am so interested.
The religion itself wasn't a plot point, more so the fact that I wanted this girl, Cerise, I wanted her to be a complete and total fish out of water. She had the most sheltered upbringing. And I wanted that for her because it makes everything like a sense of wonder. I don't read my own reviews, but my husband does. And he told me, oh my gosh, your reviews look great. The only thing is sometimes people complain that they wanted it like raunchier, hotter. And I'm like, oh, come on. She was raised in a literal temple. She has no experience. Every touch is brand new and mystical. And as opposed to, I wrote some adult contemporary romances under the pen name Macy Beckett. Those are adults. They've been in it. They know what they like. They know what they want. They're down to clown. But Cerise, I wanted this experience of a character being so new to the world. And that just felt really special to me from the very, very beginning. The temple and the goddess was just a construct to get us there, right? Now, the goddess was always exactly the way she is from the beginning. From the very first draft, she was always the same. And interestingly, I've had a couple people say, oh, was your inspiration this deity? And it's a deity I can't remember the name of, something in Eastern culture. And I could easily say no because I had never heard of that deity before. So I wondered, what was the inspiration for this goddess that's equal parts good and bad? And then I remembered that in this extremely high control, high demand religion of mine, I had to attend 4 years of a religious school. Every day before high school, I had to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to church and sit through a whole hour of religious study, and we spent a whole school year studying just the Old Testament and a whole school year studying just the New Testament of the King James Version. And if you've studied the Bible, you know there is a vast difference between how Old Testament God and New Testament God are portrayed. Old Testament God is scary as shit. Old Testament God is going to destroy you just for funsies, right? But New Testament God loves you so much. New Testament God doesn't mind that you killed his son. It's cool. He'll forgive you, right? Tell me that that's not where my inspiration for Shira came from. I just, it wasn't cognizant, but I'm pretty sure that's where that unfolded.
The duality of Shira too, because that's such a duality of people. We're not all inherently good and we're not all inherently bad. I mean, even if you're somebody who's driving and you swear at somebody, that's not going to come from the good side of somebody. And I'm saying that as an example on a very surface level. When Cerise goes to pay homage and respect to Shira when they're traveling, to acknowledge both sides is also kind of acceptance of yourself. When you get, from a deeper of like accepting yourself in all of who you are, the good and the bad.
Exactly right. Exactly. I started thinking, I think because I had heard some kind of study where the overwhelming majority of people believe they are above average drivers, which violates the law of averages, right? So I took that and I really went with it. And I thought, wow, in what other ways do I assume I'm above average? And I thought, I assume I'm a really good person, but what does that look like? And am I really a little more morally gray? And it led to this self-acceptance where, no, I'm not perfect. I'm not as good as I probably thought I was. And I'm okay with that. Just like you mentioned, where Cerise talks about how your darkness is a gift. Without pain, pleasure isn't as meaningful. Without the promise of death, time has no value. It all fits together, not to say permit yourself to be a psychopath, but we all have good and bad in us, and that's okay.
And you have some good and some bad characters in your book. So while we're looking at it, you were saying that writing fantasy was difficult because we have to create, you have to create everything, and then we, the reader, get to experience everything that you have created. And so my thought process behind that is kind of, what was it like then to write tropes that are familiar and that are established? Like, we're creating everything new, but the tropes are still there for us no matter what. And so we have, off the top of my head, we have found family. We have kind of forced proximity. We're on a quest. We're all together. And found family is one of my most favorite tropes. And something that Jessica Marie and I say a lot is that it is very special when an author can show us and not tell us that we have a found family. And you show us so beautifully here with the interactions between Cerise and all of her friends and our adventures together, and the way that we all come together and we really care about each other by the end was really wonderful, because sometimes it's the family that you choose. And you know what? Sometimes the tropes are there for us no matter what.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I don't sit down and deliberately make a list of the tropes that I want to explore. It happens organically, and I didn't realize it until recently, but I'm pretty sure that all of my books involve found family. All of them, to varying degrees. But that's something that calls to me, that just comforts me on a cellular level. The idea that you can build your own village and form bonds with people who will love you as much as your birth family will. And yeah, it just happened organically. And I don't know, I'd have to ask my therapist why that is.
I explore that every week in therapy, because it is it is choosing, because you even have Cerise's internal thought. She's like, and again, this isn't just telling. This is just, she's picking up on different relationships with different characters. She's like, I guess I'm the little sister in this situation. They're being really protective and they're protecting because they're characters that are protecting her because they care, not because of a control situation, which is all that she's known for 20 years in the temple from a patriarchal society. And they even the other characters are acknowledging her upbringing, to be like, why aren't you questioning things? Of course. Why would you? It's only been 4 days. You have to unlearn all of this, all that you've ever known. And that journey, that there's such allowance there from the other characters, where there isn't this resentment towards her for not understanding what's going on.
Right. Yeah. In real life, deconstruction takes a very long time. It's not something you can force. And Cerise's journey to deconstruction happened in a few moons. Mine took until I was in my 40s, which is almost a little bit embarrassing to me, because I like to see myself as strong and bold and taking no crap from anyone. But there was nothing strong or brave about the way I half-heartedly Pascal wagered myself into staying tied to my church out of fear that what if they're right and I'm wrong? What if they're right and the worst sin I can commit in life is being so privileged as to receive this gospel and then reject it? Because that's what I was taught when I was a child and my brain was squishy. They taught me that if you ever deny this amazing gospel we've given you, straight to outer darkness for all eternity, there's no help for you. There's no forgiveness for you. And so just as intended, what that results in is people saying, well, maybe I should just kind of keep going with the flow. What if they're right? And I don't like that I did that. I kind of wish I had been like Cerise and been much more bold, much sooner, and said, wait, you know what? This is all BS. You know, you made all this up just to control me. So, real life indoctrination is, it's a villainous thing, and it does not, unfortunately, resolve itself as quickly as it did for Cerise.
Well, and the conversation of being ruled by fear is even approached in here, because even if you're ruled by fear, there's a rule of the familiar, because that's less scary, because you're like, okay, well, I know this is the direction that it would take, not this unknown.
Mm-hmm. And I know that we haven't gotten on the topic of this yet, but also the theme that patriarchy hurts more than just women. There's a scene at the end that I won't get into much detail in, but we see a way in which a man with incredible power in this system has been deeply wounded by the very system that empowered him. And when I drafted the discussion questions, which I just put up on my website recently, one of the questions was, why was Cerise able to find herself and basically deconstruct, but this other character wasn't? And the obvious answer is relationships. She had people around her loving her and gently asking questions, gently pointing out inconsistencies. Whereas this other character did not. This other character was much more alone and had nothing except faith to lean on.
I think it's very important for us, because it was absolutely wonderful, but for the broader audience, that you have written this book, because while your personal journey might have taken longer, the result is something that someone can pick up, that is maybe in their 20s, that's maybe in their late teens, that maybe this will, kind of jar them into a critical thinking space that they weren't there before, and it can kind of like relate to, right? We're always talking about media literacy. The lessons that are in this book are universal, and I think everyone can take something away from this and apply it to themselves, because we are all, or we should be, questioning everything. Now let's talk about the men. We have a man in power in our system, but Cerise says something that I found very kind of indicative of where things were going. And kind of in the beginning, when Cerise is talking about the order and she's talking about her place and the members in it, Cerise says, and there are some priests that I stay away from. I know that look. I know what they're actually here for, and I don't associate with them. Cerise's then kind of projection of like faith and safety into our high priest, like our high priest, is then she's like, oh, he's not like that. He's not like that. And then we kind of slowly start to peel the onion, and it is a really wonderful exploration of the people in power are also just people. And that's an important lesson too. There is nothing special, really. Everyone is just a person. And it's interesting then, that if everyone is just a person, but we have these curses, we have magic, and then we have rules. And isn't it just so funny that the men created the rules? Isn't that just so special? Yeah. So the men,
and how the rules just work in their favor.
in their favor. And no, women cannot do these things because, it will make you maybe not as strong if you have magic, maybe not as, powerful, maybe not as gifted. And that affects your that affects everything about your worth, all of these things. Like, you have to be a very certain way and follow these very certain steps. And then maybe you'll get, a little bit powerful, but we're still in charge of you.
And then what's one of the additional statements is like, and Cerise says this, well, it's to keep everybody equal. It's about compromise.
Balance.
And they're like, interesting how the compromise is only in favor of the men. Like, it's the little food for thought that helps stimulate her to start asking the questions, because she was in an environment where she couldn't for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're raised when you are indoctrinated, whenever you have a common sense question, there's always an answer. And the answer doesn't always make sense, but then the follow-up will be a thought-ending cliche like, we're not meant to understand God's plan, or something like that. So yes, Cerise, well, wait a minute. In a world created by a goddess, why do men have the power? Oh, well, for balance. The goddess didn't want to give more favor to her own sex, obviously. And then, but wait, what about this? And once she is away from the sterile environment of the temple where no outside influence can touch her, here comes the influence, and that's what unravels everything.
Well, and I like one of the things that she even says. She goes, if Shira expected this one thing, and loosely addressing like romance, why would this be such a happy thing? Like, that
exactly.
doesn't seem like
exactly,
and it's just like the little things, and it's the self questioning in her internally is just as important as her external questions with the people she's trying to work through things with.
Right. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that in this world, when the priests are the sole wielders of magic, and when a priest, a second-born, receives the gift of magic, he loses his physical desire. It's like a trade-off. You get this magic, you lose the ability to do this other wonderful thing with your body. And so they're always telling her, hey, if you want to get the sight, you can't fool around. And yes, she says, if Shira wanted me to be celibate, why wouldn't she remove my desire the way she did for the priests? And little things like that begin to not quite add up. And you can see slowly that the reason for their wanting to suppress the women is envy. It's jealous. Why should you get to do this thing that I can't do when I'm a man and I am entitled to do anything I damn well please? Why should you get to have something that I cannot have? So, yeah, and I think anyone raised in purity culture has received some kind of message that if you do this, then you are less than. I think we've all heard Elizabeth Smart's chewed gum analogy. If you have sex before marriage, you're a chewed up wad of gum. No one's going to want you. And how that really, really messed with her head after her abduction. And all of those messages, I've heard the anecdote of the licked cupcake. Hey, girls, I've got some cupcakes. Who wants one? Oh, wait, before you take one, I licked them all. Do you want them now? No, just like no one's going to want you. The messaging is just heinous. And God, if nothing else is accomplished through this book, I hope that people will at least be more cognizant of what they let other people teach their children. I've got no beef with God. I've got no beef with religion, but please be cognizant of what people are teaching your children.
Especially in the present day and age. We are in the year 2024. This is all very important. Something that is also very important, that is, well, not one of the heavier themes of this book. There is a lightness here, and it's in a disappearing boy. And let's talk about the romance thread that runs through this book with our actual half king. I love this romance. It is a very sweet and touching kind of, I would say like a slow burn. Enemies to maybe like the tiniest. And
no,
she says, I'm arguing as if the author isn't here with us. She says, like, he must hate me. He must hate me. Those words are said. So you could say, maybe just a bit in the beginning, because maybe it's not enemies so much as there is this like welling, of big feelings for Cerise, for the king, for the country, for the land, for the goddess. Everyone is feeling a lot of big feelings. And so then to watch Cerise have this budding romance was really lovely. And to have her grow in worth, self-discovery, and power truly of yourself, of herself, of everything was lovely. It was very lovely. What was it like writing this romance?
I loved it. I'm also, just like I'm drawn to found families, I'm drawn to sweet romances. And by sweet, I don't mean the absence of sex on the page, because there's lots of detailed sex on the page. I just mean they learn to really appreciate each other and value each other. They form a friendship. They both are able to assuage something in the other that is deep and painful. We have Kian who disappears, and we don't know what happens to him at the beginning. We just know he turns to shadow at sunset. We don't know where he actually goes, and the torment he feels, and the hopelessness he feels. And when Cerise arrives, the rumor is this great oracle is coming, and he makes the mistake of getting his hopes up and then sees that she's not an oracle at all, and it hurts. And so his reaction, yes, lashing out. I wouldn't call it enemies to lovers. I would call it getting off on the wrong foot to lovers.
There you go.
But
that's
yes.
better. That's better.
I like that. That's the new trope.
That's great.
Getting off on the wrong foot to lovers. But yeah, I love the way they come to appreciate each other. He makes her feel worshipped for the first time. Growing up in the temple, devoid of real affection, she had to receive her affection from animals. When she needed to feel love, she visited the rabbit hutch or the kennels. By the way, giving her own dog, Blue, in this book was like the most satisfying thing on planet Earth. This one little companion, and that moment passes between them, and they know they'll never be alone again. Every lonely child understands that feeling, right? So to put her in this relationship with someone who appreciates her in a way that no one else has, who doesn't care if she has the sight, doesn't care what she can do, but loves who she is. That was really, really satisfying. It was really satisfying to give her that. And then, Kian's just a hunk. He's a snack. So that was nice too.
Well, and you know what? It's not just the physical intimacy, like you were saying. The sweet moments are in those emotional there's emotional intimacy there too, where they are taking moments away. I'm trying to word it in a way that doesn't spoil things. We know where we eventually find out where Kian goes in the shadows, and so does Cerise, and they share moments in those in-betweens. And I love that it's not just it's to get to know each other better. And I love a get to know you before the physical intimacy trope. I think it's because then it's like, oh my gosh, you're falling in love with the person and I say that in a culture present day that seems to stray away from that to each their own, but I love the get to know. I love getting to know somebody first. I think that's always so sweet.
I always trend toward that too. And oh gosh, I recently heard a term and I can't remember it now, but there's a term that I didn't know existed. And it means that you have to feel emotionally connected to a person before you can have good sex with them. And I was just scrolling one day and somebody was like, oh my gosh, I just found out that Chapel Roan is something sexual. Me too. And I thought, what's that? And so I Googled it. I was like, oh my God, that sounds like me. That sounds just like me. So I don't think it's a coincidence that, and again, I'm sure it's not just the Half King. If I went back and reviewed the plots for all my other books, I wouldn't be surprised if everybody gets to know each other before sexy times happen, because, you write what you know, you write what's natural to you.
And when we're talking about the sex on page, when you are writing that, do you like kind of block it out? Like, do you have, I know some authors use like action figures.
I was going to say they use like art so statues.
So they visualize like what's actually like physically
possible?
able to do. Yeah. So what is that process like for you?
No, I've never ever heard of somebody taking action figures and smashing them to see what. No, but I've got that in my head now, and that's funny. No, I just go with it. I just imagine it in my head. That's hilarious though.
Now you're going to be like, wait, is this going to be a new skill set that I'm adding to my repertoire?
I find it funny too, because like sometimes, you're reading that, they're like, you're very flexible to be able to do that. Did we have a doll? Did we see if we could actually do stuff like that? It's very fun. So that's very interesting. And I do love that there is sex on page, and there is a physical manifestation of what happens there, because we have our character Cerise experiencing her own awakening, as it were, into power, but also into love. And I want to kind of talk about you equating the two here, because wow, very special. Men are telling the women in the order that they cannot do these certain things, but then it is found that and we know this, that love makes everyone, but in this case, Cerise, very strong. Love is very special. Love is the winner of emotions here. And it is that love that the priests are trying to tamp down. So, equating love and power starts at the beginning of the book, honestly. We love that, and flows through the end. But that was always going to be one of our main themes. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, love is an empowering thing. I don't think any of us have ever felt our strongest when we felt unloved. And this kind of traces back to a very, very long time ago. I was inappropriately young and newly married to my first husband, and I was feeling very conflicted about sex. So I went to talk to my religious leader and told him, I feel bad about this. And he went on this diatribe and said, oh my gosh, no, you shouldn't feel bad about it. And he went on and on about how important sex is. He said, men will fight wars to come home and make love to their wives. Men go to work so that they can come home and make love to their wives. The way he sounded, a wild thing to say. He made it sound like men live and breathe for sex. And I remember thinking to myself, A, he can't be serious. B, if he is serious and it really is that important, then who has the power? Who has the real power? If he's right, and men's whole universe revolves around having sex, it's obviously us that have the power. And so obviously that would be why they teach girls, don't give it up unless this boy has met all of these qualifications through the church, unless he's church approved, because then they get to make the boys jump through the hoops. They get to use the promise of women's bodies as a carrot on the end of a stick to make the boys do all of the things the church wants before they will approve them for a good, worthy marriage. And I began to see kind of how it all works and fits together. So in The Half King, it's much more literal. It is known that physical love will empower a woman, but empowering women is not the goal of the men. And so they try to convince everybody that if you engage in physical love and you have the sight, your sight will be weakened. So if you really want to serve the goddess, guard your chastity, ladies, so that you can have, more ability to serve your creator. The goal is not empowerment. It's the opposite of that. And religious trauma for the win, man.
Resentment.
Yes. Resentment. Not trauma, just resentment. And resentment is just fine. There is nothing wrong with resentment, especially in The Half King when we are resenting all of these men that are trying to control us. We're not resenting our found family men. We love them, though. I, in particular, very much like your curses here. I found the curses to be incredibly interesting, incredibly creative, and they really stood out. I was horrified with one of them, with the mental curse. I was intrigued with another. I was interested. It is incredibly creative. Of course, you are a wonderful author. This is not surprising to anyone. But throughout the course of our quest, because we're questing, our curses are all, called into question. There's a lot of things in play. And at the resolution of our story, of course, we have a little epilogue, but at the resolution of our story, we're in kind of a relatively happy place. We're relatively happy with what's going on, with plot points that are still yet not finished. So I have questions, and that is, what is next for you in this journey of the Half King? What is next for Cerise and her found family?
I'm working on the sequel now. I can't say too much because it's hard to know what's going to change during revisions. I would gladly tell you, well, here's kind of the direction I'm going, and I'd keep it vague. But honestly, who knows? A lot can change in the editorial process. But I want to say, because you reminded me when you were talking about the curses, one of those curses was inspired by a classic literary tale. I think it's either Dr. Faust or Dr. Faustus. Are you familiar with the legend? So there's this old tale in which an academic is obsessed with knowledge. So he sells his soul to the devil in exchange for all knowledge in the universe. And the devil gladly takes that bargain because the devil knows what this academic does not know, that the human mind isn't capable of holding all knowledge in the known universe. So this man just hands over his soul and immediately loses the ability to cognate because his mind is just bursting at the seams with information. And I always loved that story because it was so sneaky of the devil. It was like so smart and crafty, like, wow, I didn't even see that coming. So the Calatrus curse was inspired by the legend of Dr. Faust. The other ones, I just figured everyone has a role, all right? How are we going to get the goddess to the ground? Well, someone has to beguile her down. They can be cursed with destructive allure. You would think that destructive beauty, yeah, I want that one. No, it never works out for these people. And then, you got to have one that tries to kill the goddess, okay? Bloodlust. And then the kings, his has to stay a little bit mysterious because his role in the betrayal was linked to someone else's role that stays a mystery. But yes, you had asked about inspiration, and I said sometimes I don't know where it comes from. I do know where the Calatrus curse was inspired.
And that one is, now knowing the story, that one is also kind of maybe the scariest too.
Agreed.
Just because what a wonderful thing to know all of the secrets of the universe, but then to never be able to do anything with that is really, really horrifying. And that kind of curse, especially because one of our characters obviously has it. And there are moments where the curse kind of peeks through and everyone is just like, wow.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Somebody asked me which of the 4 curses would I pick, and I decided I would take the Petros bloodlust because I can walk around angry all day, right? But I would prefer not to disappear into some horrible nightmare every night. And I don't want the calatrus delirium. And I certainly don't, want to have to walk around with a veil over my face for the destructive allure. So yeah, I'll just be ragey. I'm going through perimenopause. I'm half ragey all the time anyway, right?
Say, we're all kind of ragey right now.
Ragey,
even if not hormonal, through, circumstances that we're all living in. So that seems like...
Yeah, I'm an Aries. I'm like that most of the time too. So, let's go. Let's have a little tussle. I think I would have to absolutely agree with you. Jess, what curse would you choose?
Yeah, I feel like that because I think to have all of that knowledge, it's like with this Spider-Man, with great power, comes great responsibility. But then you can't do anything. You can't do anything. There's no responsibility to be had. You're going outside of your mind. You can't do anything with that knowledge. So, yeah, I think that's really like the only logical one. And like logical one.
You could still live. Yeah,
you can live with it. I think it's just like we're already living with the curse.
Yeah. I mean, the most cursed of timelines, for sure. For sure. I know you said that you are writing book 2 and there's too much going on there. I will just ask you this. Is this a confirmed duology or are we expanding?
This is a confirmed duology. Funny story, not haha funny. I had originally written this as a standalone, and they asked me to expand it, and I said, "Well, okay, sure, I can do that." And I did not anticipate the sequel being so difficult. It probably took me 2 months to get enough of a plot that I could, because apparently just leaving the villain alive at the end is not a lot, right? And people are like, oh my God, that cliffhanger. But if you really think about it, the end of The Half King is very HEA-ish. We have, God, I don't want to spoil it. It's a satisfying conclusion that leaves the door open for more. So I had to find creative ways to wedge that door farther open. And I can tell you one thing, in the sequel, we're going to see the rest of the realm. In book 1, we were isolated to Mortara. So that is one thing I'm confident will not change during revisions. Everybody wants to see the rest of the realm. So there will be lots of journeys through all of the other lands and seas.
That'll be so exciting. And then, I mean, while you're working on the second book, Confirmed Duology, you're also still doing appearances. I saw on your site that you're going to be at Barnes and Noble, like you're doing events. You're going to keep yourself busy. How are you splitting the two? Where else can we find you? What else do you have on deck?
Well, there are a few things I can't announce yet. If you want to be, kept up to date, go to melissa-landers.com, and I have an events page. You can also join my newsletter there. But yeah, I'm adding more and more events, and I think the key there is keeping things on the weekends. I do like to give myself the weekends off from writing, and so I'm happy to do signings. In fact, what time is it? 3? Once we start shuttling kids this afternoon or this evening, I'm going to stop in at my local indie Joseph Beth and sign more books because they sold through all the stock that I had signed for them. So weekends, I am happy to do all kinds of promo and stuff because it doesn't feel like work. It's fun. It is still a mind freak to go into a bookstore and say, hello, this is who I am. And they, oh my gosh. And they bring me the books and I feel like a little celebrity. That is a mind freak. I love it. It never gets old. So Do you work so you have this event, this episode is being released on January 6th. And then we have the, your event in January is on January 18th. And it's also going to be like you allow open-ended questions and these opportunities. Do you ever find yourself blurring like, okay, I have to be in Half King mindset today, not in book 2 mindset today. So not to
release any spoilers?
No, that's never a problem. It only gets dicey if I'm asked to do an event for a book that I wrote years in the past.
Oh, okay.
I went to Texas last spring to promote a book that came out in 2022. And that was tough. They're asking questions and I thought, I don't remember what they're talking about. That's where it gets a little difficult.
Do you reread? So do you reread your content or you don't, because you don't know what questions people are going to have?
Yeah. Plus it's cringy to reread my old stuff. It just is. It's funny. Sometimes I'll look back, especially with my adult contemporary romances, and I'll reread those and go, oh my gosh, this is hilarious. This is great. I can't believe I wrote this. But for some reason, going back and rereading the YAs, maybe because teenage vernacular changes so quickly, reading those, no, I will cringe myself physically inside out if I reread my old books.
That's when you could, if they ask you a question, you're like, what did you think about that? You got to put it back on.
That's an excellent strategy. I'll have to remember that.
Thank you so much for taking the time and letting us pick your brain on it. I'm ready for my reread. I'm ready to take notes because I was if I read the whole thing and I was telling Laura this at the beginning of the episode or before we started recording. I go, I want to reread because I'm somebody who will get so boggled down in the details. I'm I have to enjoy the book as it is first. And then I'm going to be highlighting and all of the annotating because it's so good. It's so good and it's so exciting. And I love a book that makes you want to think and see how it's applicable to just because it's fantasy. Reading is inherently political. And that's what this book is. And it allows you to question everything.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. The Half King is amazing. It is out. It is perfect and lovely. And thank you to Melissa for being with us and for creating this wonderful world that makes you think. And we need to think more. And also, there is... And just for our listeners, there is so much joy in this book. And we are still in January trying to find the joy. And the Half King absolutely does that. So thank you, Melissa. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here.
Thanks. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Please make sure you're following Melissa on all of her socials. We'll make sure that those are in our show notes. And as always, please feel free to follow us. We're on ACOFAE Podcast on Instagram and ACOFAE Laura and ACOFAE Jessica on TikTok. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.